been very excited. We have been very excited to bring you this session today, and we're delighted that there's so much interest. I can see there's around 80 participants, and if you can imagine if this were taking place in a real building in person, you would be mingling right now, eating pastries, having coffee with people from local government, active partnerships, national governing bodies of sport, academics, charities, disabled persons, user-led organizations, and many more. There is a wonderful cross-section of the sector present here today, just reflecting what an important topic this is that we all care passionately about. So today is a chance to hear about the work of the collective so far, and a chance to discuss and reflect on some of the challenges facing us and what we can do about them. We also hope many of you feel inspired to stay in touch with us in the collective and maybe become a member, and we'll talk more about that later on. Now, you will all, I think, have received the agenda and the slides over email. The first part of the agenda will be some short presentations from different members of the collective, talking about the journey we've been on, the challenges, the change we hope to bring about, and how we think we could achieve that. Then we're going to pause for questions and have a break.
It's going to be a bit of a...
After that, we'll go into the second main part of the session, which is the breakout groups, where we're going to be really interested to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your input, and then we'll reconvene for a final discussion. So before we get underway, just a few announcements about how the session will run. Again, we're recording this first part. Please mute yourselves, camera on or off. If you need any technical support, if things aren't working, you can privately message Cecilia Kumar in the chat. So bring up the chat box and then you can choose from the drop down who you want to send the chat to. We also have 2 BSL interpreters with us today. If you would like an interpreter in the breakout room with you later, we can arrange that if you can privately message Emma Cunnington in the chat, and we can arrange that for the breakout rooms too. Now, throughout the session, please make productive use of the chat, as you have been doing so far, to make comments or questions or whatever reflections you would like to share. So I think that means we are ready to get going with the first session. So I'm going to introduce you to Alyssa Ayling from Sense, who is going to lead the first part of the session. Alyssa, over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Morning, everybody. Hope everybody is well. I see that some people have got the sun out where they are, so lucky you if that's the case. Yeah, so I'm just going to introduce, I suppose, how the group came about, how this collective came about, and the journey that we've been on so far, just to give you a bit of context before going into a bit of a deeper dive with the detail. So, as Tim said, I work for Sense, which is a national disability charity supporting people with complex disabilities since the 1960s. And I head up our sport and physical activity programme at Sense, which has been running now for about 7 years or so. And we've been working very closely with Sport England on a few funded projects over the years. And one of which was a project that we have some challenges with in terms of our evaluation and our monitoring. And I just wanted to kind of share with you that example, which has sort of led to where we are today, I guess, in terms of the wider involvement of this. So the project we were delivering had an evaluation element to it, but we worked with a university that were using very academic kind of measures, and they really weren't suitable or fit for purpose for the people that we support at Sense. Many people we support are unable to self-report, for example, So we were needing to explore alternative ways of gathering the evidence, because we really knew that there was a lot of impact in the work that we were doing. So working with this university, they started to introduce some quite traditional methods of evaluation. And we found that we basically weren't able to get that kind of rich data that we knew was happening at an individual level for the people that we were supporting through our programme. So we learned quite a lot through that process. And that was a 2-year kind of relationship and project. And it led us to that question of, I wonder if anyone else is having these sorts of challenges across the sector and across our kind of networks in terms of the people we were working with. And at the time we were working in conjunction with Disability Rights UK. And I basically started the conversation with them and said, these are some of the challenges we're having around impact and being able to showcase the work that we're doing. And Disability Rights UK had some similar thoughts to us, and we thought there must be more organisations that potentially are in the same, experiencing the same challenges that we are. So we both contacted our respective networks, so Sport England, a number of other social care charities, research colleagues, disability sport organisations that we were working with and alongside, and found that there was a bit of an appetite in this space in terms of those traditional methods. Maybe they aren't exactly fit for purpose, and is there something that we could do as a collective to address that and to look at influencing change in the future? So we then got together just before lockdown. It was our kind of first face-to-face meeting, and just shared our initial kind of thoughts on this topic and this area of work to understand, was there a place for a collective, and how would it work, and what would it look like, and what would we all want to achieve? And there was a lot of passion in the room and a lot of enthusiasm to get involved with this area of work. And over the first course of, I suppose, the first year of working together, we really wanted to understand our vision, what was our kind of mission, why were we here, what did we all want to get from the group, and what were our future aspirations in terms of measurement, evaluation in physical activity in this space with disabled people. So we spent some time working on that, working on our vision and our mission, and we always wanted this group to be something that we could broaden out, that could be shared with colleagues, that could be an open door for others to be involved with. It feels like it's been quite a long journey up until this point, but it's great that we feel we're ready to kind of talk about, and other speakers will come on to the detail, talk about some of the work that we've been doing to date and welcome input from other organisations and individuals. I think one of the big things that we recognised was that we did some sort of self-reflection as a group, and there are some definite gaps in terms of who we would like to be part of this group. And so today is really about not only sharing where we're up to, but inviting those additional voices into the collective, and those people that might have a passion within this area that we're unaware of, that could really contribute towards the continued journey of the group. So I think that kind of gives a bit of a summary as to how we've got to where we are today, and I'll pass over to Tim Bidey, who'll be able to take you through a bit more of the journey in detail. I'll hand over to Tim.
Thanks, Alyssa. Isn't it fantastic to see so many people on the call today interested in this this topic? We've been watching the registrations go up all week. Hello everyone, my name's Tim. I work for an employee-owned social purpose consultancy called Traverse, where I lead our work in support of voluntary community and social enterprise sector organisations. Traverse first became involved in the collective following previous research and evaluation projects alongside Disability Rights UK, Sense and Sport England. And as Alyssa just mentioned, we were approached by those organisations to help them collate their early thinking around exactly what Alyssa just described, to help those and other organisations bring their thinking together around the challenges that they had experienced in this area and that they had heard about in this area, and to think about the changes that they might want to bring out in the long term to address this. Supporting this type of work is exactly the stuff that we love to do at Traverse. It's in line with our social impact mission, and we're really lucky that we get to do this alongside a lot of different organisations. And so what I'm going to take you through today is a bit more of an in-depth description around the journey that the collective went on when thinking through this issue of the challenge that organisations faced and what changes they might want to bring about in the longer term. Some of you on the call in the research evaluation or the delivery space might recognise this as a theory of change process. But for those that haven't heard of that term before, don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it step by step. So the first stage is what I said in terms of focusing on the challenge and really beginning to think about the challenge from a lot of different perspectives across different people, different organisations and different sectors. And so we encouraged members of the collective to step back from their services, step back from their organisations, and really think about what were the different challenges that disability, sport and physical activity, and health and social care organisations face when working in this space. And to think about actually not just those challenges, but what are the root causes of those challenges, and how do they play out across the different contexts that these organisations work in. And they came up with these 5 problem statements that you can now see on your screen. So when we're thinking about the development of physical activity opportunities, environments that are inclusive of and accessible to disabled people, these are the 5 challenges that were felt to inhibit that. The first is that the current evidence base out there is fragmented and actually inhibits the development of effective approaches to support disabled people becoming and staying more physically active. There's no go-to resource out there that anyone interested in this space can look to. It's in lots of different places, online, offline. Some organisations know some things, other organisations know other things. And that's not very useful when you're starting out as a practitioner or an organisation in this space. The second main problem they highlighted was this idea of how popular standardized tools in this space, as Alyssa referenced, they're not always necessarily suitable or specific enough to measure the impacts of physical activity focused programs for disabled people. That, or they require too much resource or prior experience for organisations to use them effectively or use them on a one-to-one basis with the people that they support. At the same time, whilst those measures are not necessarily effective, we also heard about how organisations struggle to develop or adapt alternatives to those measurements that are still seen as rigorous, but are also context specific and appropriate. And the weight of responsibility here isn't just for delivery organisations. Funders are also involved in this landscape as well. And we heard about challenges around how some funders tended to lean towards preferring standardised tools as the gold standard when it came to measuring impact, and would try and direct organisations down this path, perhaps even when it's not the most appropriate way to go. And then whilst all these are very common experiences, the 5th challenge that was outlined was this idea that actually where organisations learn lessons around this, where people try to overcome these challenges or come up with specific responses to them, these lessons aren't always effectively shared between organisations. In the same way that the evidence base is fragmented, there wasn't any one single place for organisations to come together, speak about their experience of these challenges, and speak about potential solutions. So these were the main challenges that were felt to limit the development of physical activity opportunities and environments that are inclusive of and accessible to disabled people. So if those are the challenges, the next stage was thinking about what is the big picture that we would like to create. What are the opposite of those challenges? What is the world that we would like to see instead? And we worked with the collective to help them think through the long-term changes that they'd want to contribute to or enable to address these challenges. I think the easiest way of thinking of this sometimes can be as a newspaper headline. If your project to review, if the collective was a success, what would the newspaper headline be that lands on your doorstep or your inbox tomorrow morning? And the one that the collective reached after a lot of discussion was actually a world where physical activity opportunities and environments exist across sectors created with and for disabled people. But actually, if that's the bigger change we want to see, there are changes that we need to achieve before that in order for that to be a reality. And these are the main two longer term changes that the collective wants to bring about. One, to improve collaboration among disability sport and physical activity and health and social care sectors around physical activity interventions. And two, to improve the evidence base and continued learning of how to deliver effective physical activities by and for disabled people across relevant sectors. So really responding to that challenge of how both the evidence base is fragmented and how actually organisations can find themselves fragmented and cut off from each other in their experience of this. So bringing organisations together and bringing learning together is a key kind of longer term aim for the collective. But if those are the longer term changes that the collective wants to bring about, there's an acknowledgement, I think, by everyone in the group that what we're talking about here is not small. We're talking about quite sweeping changes, really, changing cultures around how we approach research and evaluation and measurement and design of interventions in this space. And so actually, in the spirit of kind of thinking about the first step, we encourage the collective to think about, well, what's the role that it can play in bringing about those changes? The collective is just one group of organisations, and there are many organisations and different groups out there. What are the strengths of the collective? And that's where we essentially came with thinking about these shorter term changes that the collective wants to bring about and wants to hold itself responsible to. And these are the two kind of key changes the collective will be focusing on in the short term. One, supporting a more nuanced use of the evidence base to help organisations design interventions. So moving away from a siloed culture where organisations are constantly required to reinvent the wheel because they don't have that information to draw on. And to do that, they're looking to kind of support sharing of evidence between organisations, improve the existing evidence base, and improve organisations' understanding of how to draw on that evidence base. And the second shorter term change is focused on increasing how often specific appropriate measures are used by organisations. So moving away from a culture of standardised measures where they're not appropriate, and moving towards a culture where we're actually using measures that are appropriate to the context in which they're being used in. And there's an acknowledgement here that this isn't just about delivery organisations. This also requires a change in approach when it comes to funders and commissioners. It's about ensuring organisations are supported to adapt and apply different measures. And fundamentally, in this space, it's about the more consistent use of co-production approaches to make sure that measures are being used in the right way in the right spaces. So this is what the collective came to in terms of what were the challenges that organisations face in this area, what is the world that the collective wants to see in the longer term, and what are some of the changes that we will need to bring about in order to get to that world, both in the long term and the shorter term. I'm now going to pass over to Clara, who will tell you a little bit more about what the collective is proposing it will actually do in order to start bringing about these changes.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, so I'm going to, as Tim says, talk a little bit about the sort of how do we get there, how do we make that change. So my name's Clara, my pronouns are she and her, and I joined the collective when I worked at Leonard Cheshire, which lots of you may know, and I was working on a big project to research how Leonard Cheshire could best support all the disabled people who were kind of part of the organisation, so staff, volunteers, people in our programmes, and people in our care homes and day services. So that's how I sort of became part of it. I now work at Stonewall, the LGBT charity, but I'm still hanging on here as part of the collective. So I'm really pleased to be part of this event and see so many people here. The observants amongst you may have noticed that I'm actually coming to you from Pret today. I had an electric outage at my house, so please excuse me if it's a little bit noisy in the background with Pret's lovely music. So yes, talking to you about how we get to make that change that we want to see. So there's a few things that the collective has already started doing in the time since we kind of started to get together. And then there's a few things that we had ideas about, but we wanted to wait a little bit before getting started on. So I'll talk to you about both of those things. So something that we've already got going on, which Tim mentioned briefly, is co-production training. So within our collective at the moment, we've got a couple of people with some great expertise around co-production and who have really encouraged us to see how important that is as part of what we do. So as many of you know, disabled people and disability rights activists often advocate that all types of kind of research and development of new programs should include disabled people in the process, where the actions taken by disabled people or with disabled people rather than kind of on their behalf or just in consultation. And we really believe that that participatory approach should be central to what we do here at the collective. So we have already run a couple of trainings, kind of both for the group itself and with some affiliates, so that everybody kind of has a really good grounding within the collective as to what co-production is, which will lead on to some of our ideas, which I'll talk about in a moment. We've also been doing a bit of input into Sport England's evaluation strategy. So one example of that is that we were asked to give some feedback on the Sport England Active Lives survey, which lots of you might be familiar with, which looks to find out about people all around England's participation in physical activity and barriers to doing that as well. So as a group, we've kind of fed in to that, and we've advised from the perspective of organisations which support disabled people. And another really important thing that we're doing at the moment, and which this event itself kind of forms part of, is something that Alyssa also mentioned briefly, which is making sure that this network itself has really great representation from all the communities who are maybe experiencing some of the most barriers to participating in physical activity. So we know obviously this group is focused on disabled people, but if we're taking a sort of intersectional view, we know that There are particular barriers faced by disabled people who are maybe from rural areas, or disabled people from faith communities, from communities of colour, or from LGBTQ communities. So we really want to make sure that those distinct barriers that those parts of the disabled community are acknowledged, and that we're addressing them within all the work of the collective. So we wanted to wait to go ahead with some of our other ideas until we've done a bit of that broadening of our own network. And one of those things is this event, where we're really hoping that some other people might want to get involved in what we do. So when we feel hopefully very soon that the collective's kind of ready to go ahead with some of our work in earnest, obviously if there's people who are new to joining us, we'll be really, really open to hearing other ideas, but we thought it'd be helpful to give you a few examples of ideas that we've had so far, so you can kind of imagine the sorts of things that you could do if you were also part of the collective or part of the network in some way. So our ideas for action. So the first one here on the side is about knowledge exchange. So I'll just explain what that means. So we feel that there's a need for some sort of platform where all our organisations can share and access some learnings, evidence, things like case studies and data on what does and doesn't work around physical activity programmes, which are by and for disabled people. So people are delivering great work in this area, and lots of people are building up lots of learnings, but we don't always have that opportunity to share what has worked well and what hasn't, and that means we're kind of at a disadvantage. We can't move forward as a sector. So we also know that often smaller organisations tend to miss out on these opportunities to share learnings. Sometimes those of us in bigger networks, or maybe based in London, are kind of often encouraged to be really involved in sharing and learning events when they do happen, whereas others will end up getting left out. So we thought that some sort of platform that brings together everyone's learnings and evidence, and that can be accessed by people all around the country to help them build their own evaluation tools in the best way possible, would be a really positive step. So that's something that we are thinking about doing. Another one is this second one, standardised and non-standardised tools. So Tim touched on this briefly, but the meaning of this is that funders often require, when we're running programmes with funding, the funders will often require us to use a kind of standardised tool as part of evaluating them. So I'm sure lots of you will be familiar with using a particular survey that the funder has sent to all the different programmes that they fund, and ask them to get participants to fill out the survey at the end of the programme. So they might have participated in very, very different types of programmes, but they're all being asked to fill out the same survey. And they might have very different accessibility needs as well. And yet they're still having to try and make it work to use this same type of survey. So we've identified that as a problem that lots of our organisations, and I'm sure lots of yours, have experienced. So the idea of this part of the work of the collective would be to kind of capture what tools we're all currently using, what does work, what doesn't work, how we can maybe adapt tools, or even to work with funders, really good examples of where we've worked alongside funders to say, this is how we need to slightly change this survey in order for it to be suitable. And then we can share best practice and hopefully be at a place where everyone's able to use tools that make more sense for the communities they're working with. And the last one here is co-production. So I mentioned above that we've done a bit of co-production training within the collective itself, and we've got that kind of some of that expertise in the group, but I'm sure lots of you also practice and teach about co-production too, which would be really interesting to hear about. What we want to do in this sense with the collective is potentially kind of agree on some guidance or best practice for how co-production can best be built into the development of evaluation tools for measuring physical activity focused programs. So how can we ensure that disabled people are able to contribute and be part of actually developing those tools themselves, and also into the process of evaluation, so to have a sort of more equitable process for evaluation itself. So those are just a few ideas we have. Hopefully they've kind of maybe sparked some ideas of your own, or maybe you're doing really similar things already, which we'll be really interested to hear about in our breakout groups. So I'm going to pass back to Tim to introduce that next activity.
Thank you, Clara. And indeed, thank you, Alyssa and Tim. But particularly Clara for doing a magnificent job there in your local Pret. I'd like to apologise for the noise there. I'm sorry if that affected your ability to hear what was being said or to use the interpreters. We've had a lot of very hard work to organise the session, but we weren't counting on an electrical outage. So sorry about that. Thanks as well also to our interpreters, Monia and Siobhan, for coping with that. So we're going to pause there. We've got about 5 minutes before we go to a break. We'll pause just to allow you to reflect on what you've heard and to invite any burning questions or comments you have in the chat. And I think we've had a couple already. Interesting discussion going on about disability data, how we collect and capture the relevant data. So perhaps in a moment, if I could invite in one of the speakers just to perhaps share a thought on that, maybe Tim or Alyssa, and anyone else who would like to post the question, please take the chance. Or of course, you can hold your questions for the breakout groups, that's fine too. Just a few reflections from me. Of course, I've been part of this journey as well, and it's been enormously rewarding for me personally and for Sport England. It's been a very reflective process, and certainly we've been guilty of some of the challenges, you know, of trying to use validated or standardized measures, which just haven't worked particularly well for the audience. And it's been enormously valuable to have the collective, all the expertise of the members, and to be part of the process to really open up how we can evaluate effectively for disabled physical activity opportunities. So my perspective is that the collective has got to a point where it's carried out some really important foundational work to crystallize the vision, what the challenges are, what the changes that we hope to achieve. And we're really clear now how we hope to get there.
I said no.
Just getting a bit of background noise, if I could remind you to mute yourselves. And the point as well that we hope through the session today that some of you are inspired to join us on the next part of the journey to explore some of those action areas and to add your own contributions too. So we had the question in the chat around disability data. No other questions at the moment. Would anyone from the panel, any other speakers, like to share any thoughts on that particular topic? Please just come off mute if you would like to.
I'm happy to speak to that, Tim. I can give it a whirl, and then maybe other Tim and Alyssa might want to come in as well. I think it's one of the challenges that we've been discussing as a group for quite a long time. And I guess my reflection on it is that I feel like we're at the point where we've really acknowledged, and I think in some of the discussions we've had in Sport England as well, Tim, we can see some changes around this. We've really acknowledged that some of the standardization of the tools isn't working for people. And therefore, if, you know, for example, if questions are very complex or very kind of abstract, obviously that affects and impacts the the data that we're collecting becomes less meaningful if the questions aren't meaningful to the individuals that we're asking. So I think that's a kind of really fundamental issue that we've kind of acknowledged exists, and have increasingly spoken to partners about how we can work together to be more flexible and to make sure that those questions are appropriate for people and they're meaningful to them. But I still think there's a real challenge around some of the advantages, obviously, of using some of those kind of standardized questions and validated tools are the consistency of the data that we can see, which helps not just us as kind of funders, but I think it also helps organizations in terms of building the strength of their evidence base. So I think there's a really big question in there that I don't kind of have the answer to, but I'm certainly grappling with, around how do we overcome what seem like quite significant challenges on both sides of that. And I think ultimately, and I think it sort of speaks to the point that Anna made in the chat as well, it has to be meaningful for the individuals who are being asked questions, which can be quite lengthy questions, they can be quite in-depth questions. And so perhaps there's something there as well around how we communicate the use of the information that we're kind of asking for. So, you know, why we're doing this and what that means, that maybe we're not doing to the extent that we could do at the moment. Just a couple of reflections there from me on that.
Thank you, Cecilia. And thank you too, Anna, for, yes, your point in the chat about co-production. I'm certainly learning about co-production and developing my knowledge of what it is, and the sort of equal footing that it has to have. And I think that's a great point. Would anyone else like to come in from the panel on either of those points about disability data or co-production?
I can perhaps add to Cecilia's response. I think that to build on what Cecilia is saying, you know, this movement against standardized tools for me is a recognition that when you're looking at disability and when you're looking at long-term health conditions, a one-size-fits-all approach does not work. And so I think for me this makes two things about the collective particularly key. One is that focus on knowledge sharing. From my perspective, the collective isn't trying to replace one size-fits-all approach with another. This is about building more nuanced approaches and building links between organisations to develop those nuanced approaches. And the second, I think, is the involvement of funders in the collective is absolutely key. As I mentioned in my presentation, nuanced measures, you know, work quite well at an organisation level, but speaking as an external and independent evaluator, you run into challenges when you're evaluating at a programme level, and suddenly you're looking across a grant programme or a big schema of work, trying to speak to the impact of that, but without any common measures. And I think it's so important that we bring funders into that conversation around what is the compromise between the organisational level and the programmatic level. And then just in response to the question in the chat around disability data and people not necessarily wanting to disclose or label themselves as disabled, I think actually what we're talking about today, focused on disability, is really, really relevant when we're talking about long-term health conditions as well. And so for me, I think it's important in the spirit of kind of knowledge sharing that we're not just exclusively focusing on disability within the collective's work, but we think about how else and where else it might be relevant. And I think taking some of this learning into the long-term health condition space, it will also be incredibly important going forwards and support a lot of different organisations in different ways.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to bring that chat to a close so that we can stay on time and get to a break. But I just wanted to acknowledge some of the other comments in the chat. So thank you to everyone who's contributed. So Edgar, thanks for your point about standardized language and approaches. The link from Javier, thank you. And yeah, Dave, agreeing with some of those points. Anna this tension between standardization and seeking to be accessible and inclusive, and Anna Pettican that was, and Anna Webb as well. Disability, the social model of disability, how society can exclude. So thank you. I'm going to ask you to hold some of those ideas for the breakout rooms, which is where we're going to go after the break. So how this will work, we'll have a 15-minute break. So I'll ask you to return at 11:30. I'll invite you just to mute yourselves, turn off your cameras, but stay in this meeting if you would please. We'll rejoin at 11:30 when I'll explain everything you need to know about the breakout rooms. But really, this will be your chance to share some of your reflections, some of your experiences perhaps of the challenges that we face, and some ideas, and hopefully make some connections, meet some new people as well. So on that note, thanks very much to those who have contributed to the first part. We're going to take a 15-minute break if you can come back at 11:30. Thank you.